Most shooters ask you to follow the story. Call of Juarez Gunslinger does something stranger. It changes the story while you are inside it. One moment you are chasing a gang of outlaws through a bright sunlit swamp. The next, the air thickens with fog. The landscape shifts, and the enemies you were fighting suddenly aren't who you thought they were. Cowboys become Indians. Scenes transform mid-action, all because the man telling the tale remembers it differently. You are not just playing a gunslinger, you are stepping through a version of events that keeps rewriting itself beneath your feet. And that's the trick, because in the Wild West, the truth was never the point, the legend was. This is a game where every gunfight feels like a performance, a place where Billy the Kid and Jesse James aren't just people, they are stories shaped, exaggerated, and sold to anyone willing to listen. So, what happens when you play inside a story that keeps shifting? Today, I want to explore how Gunslinger turns the unreliable narrator into a gameplay system, how it rewrites reality in real time, and how it quietly reveals the Wild West we think we know might never have existed. The story follows Silas Greaves, following a bloody path trying to avenge his brothers after he lost them in Mexico when Silas won a game of poker in Juarez against Roscoe Bob Bryant, Johnny Ringo, and Jim Reed. The trio of bandits mugged Silas and his brothers and tried to hang them, but the branch supporting the news broke, saving Silas while his brothers died. Driven by vengeance, Silas became a bounty hunter to track down the men responsible. The game begins in Abilene, Kansas, as Silas enters a saloon, a fitting setting for telling a story. He introduces himself and gets recognized as the famous bounty hunter, and meets the bartender Ben, the waitress Molly, and an enthusiastic kid called Dwight, a doubtful Jack, and sleepy Steve, and begins recounting his past, starting with the time he met Billy the Kid. Gunslinger turns narration into a gameplay mechanic, forcing players to experience how unreliable memories shape reality. As most shooters just tell you a story, this one changes it as you are playing. As Silas guides you through a sequence, the game never lets you forget that what you are experiencing is his version of events. He might walk you through an entire encounter only to suddenly rewind it, claiming he now remembers how it really happened, opening a different path right in front of you. A swamp you are walking through can shift tone mid-sentence when Silas says how it really was. At one point, when Steve dozes off, Silas deliberately changes up the story by swapping cowboys with Indians, only to immediately retract it once Steve is focused, making them vanish as quickly as they appeared. At one time, Silas gets asked if he has been pulling the leg of the listeners all this time. He answers not the whole time, indicating that he may have lied in some of his stories. Even the scale of events isn't safe from his exaggeration. Silas casually inflates the number of enemies he faced, thousands, then hundreds, and the game follows his words, reshaping the fight in real time. Objects materialize out of nowhere because he says they did. A ladder suddenly appears, a new route opens, entire environments transform, seasons themselves bend to his narration with autumn leaves appearing the moment he remembers. All of this is what makes Gunslinger's story so distinct. It doesn't just tell a story, it performs one. Through its shifting narration and strong voice acting, the game pulls you into the role of a listener in the saloon, caught up in a tale that's constantly being reshaped for effect. Silas isn't unreliable by accident, he is unreliable by design. Every exaggerated enemy, every shifting environment, every contradiction serves the same purpose, transforming history into a legend. And by letting players fight inside those changing stories, Gunslinger doesn't just tell us that myths are constructed, it makes us participate in building them. Gunslinger features numerous real-life Wild West legends like Jesse James, Billy the Kid, Pat Garrett, John Wesley Hardin, Butch Cassidy, the Talton Brothers, and Johnny Ringo. The game shows you how some of the stories are exaggerated through collectible items called nuggets of truth. They reveal the facts of the American Old West, like various subjects associated with the Old West, historical figures, and famous events to explain the truth. Take for example Billy the Kid. He is remembered as a stone cold killer and a vicious criminal. To the contrary, he wasn't any of those things. He never lived an outlaw life of robbing banks, stagecoaches, or trains. Horse thievery was the worst of his actions. Billy was credited with killing 21 people, but that number was inflated. He only killed 4 men, 2 in self-defense and 2 during a jailbreak. He owes that image to his killer, Bat Garrett, who wrote a book embellishing his exploits 2 years after Billy's death. Then Hollywood burnished that myth to a high shine. But also, there are true legends that really happened, like Jesse James. In reality, Jesse James was a former Confederate guerrilla who continued fighting in his own way after the Civil War, becoming one of the most infamous outlaws in American history. As the leader of the James Younger gang, he carried out bank and train robberies across the Midwest, building a reputation that blurred the line between criminal and folk hero. His past, however, was far from romantic. During the war, he was involved in violent guerrilla actions that included atrocities against Union supporters. The gang's downfall began after a failed bank robbery in Minnesota, which marked the start of their collapse. Jesse himself would never face justice in the traditional sense. Instead, he was killed in his own home by Robert Ford, a fellow gang member hoping to claim the bounty on his head. It is this kind of historical nugget of truth that Gunslinger builds upon. Real events and real people reshaped and exaggerated through Silas's narration until they become something closer to legend than history. Did I also mention that there is a Mexican standoff in a mission where you fight ghosts in an abandoned town? How cool is that? It was one hell of an experience. In the end, Call of Juarez Gunslinger doesn't just tell a story about outlaws, duels, and revenge. It shows how those stories are built in the first place. Through Silas's shifting narration, exaggerated encounters, and constant rewrites of reality, the game makes it clear that what we are experiencing isn't history, it's interpretation. Every changing environment, every inflated gunfight, every contradiction reveals the same truth. The past isn't fixed, it's shaped by the people who tell it, and yet, beneath all the exaggeration, there are fragments of reality, real figures, real events, anchoring the story just enough to make the myth believable. That balance between truth and fiction is what gives the legend its power, because the Wild West we think we know was never just a collection of facts, it was a story told, retold, and refined until it became something larger than reality itself. By placing the player inside that process, Gunslinger doesn't just let us witness myth making, it makes us part of it. We don't just hear the legend, we help create it. This game isn't just about the Wild West, it's about how the Wild West was invented.